You're listening to the Rosenfeld Review. Lou Rosenfeld here, joined by today's guest, Dan Hill. Hello, Dan.
Hey, Lou. How are you?
I am good. Where are you today?
I'm in Melbourne. I can't say sunny Melbourne because it's kind of heading into winter now, so it's a little bit chilly and grey, but it's Melbourne.
I heard a rumor that you were actually spending a lot of time in Singapore, and so I was really wondering, but before we get to where in the world is Dan Hill, you might know Dan, listeners, from his book, which is just over 10 years old, Dan, right? Dark
Yeah.
Matter and Trojan Horses, a strategic design vocabulary. Dark Matter, Trojan Horses, I think of your book as actually a dark horse. It's, sorry, I couldn't resist. I'm sure you've heard that one before.
That would have been a much shorter title. Well done.
Yeah. That book is like the book that I've heard people talking about as almost like a kind of secret thing. There's like the design strategist handshake, and it's got something to do with your book. I think you're not really a strategist in this space if you're not familiar with Dan's book. And Dan wrote that, came out 10 years ago.
Yeah.
You're the director of the Melbourne School of Design at the University of Melbourne. You also are a visiting professor at University College of London. You've worked in some really interesting environments with the Swedish government, with Arup, really interesting company as well. Citra in Helsinki, Fabrica in Italy, Future Cities Catapult, and the BBC, of course, in London.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
lot going on there. And
you're just making me feel quite old now, actually. That's the main thing you're doing with this biography.
That's
anyway,
the idea.
Carry on.
But my beard is a little grayer than yours, Dan. Dan is also the opening speaker, one of our featured speakers, on June 4th at a virtual conference that Rosenfeld Media is putting on. It's our next one. It's called Designing with AI. And it is been really fun to work with Dan and Jody Forlizzi, the other invited speaker. And we've got a pretty interesting program lined up with 10 case studies and demos that will, we believe, inspire you about how you can use AI as a UX designer, writer, or researcher. And we've got some pretty interesting panels convened of people who, from different perspectives, will look at the proceedings of each day with a very critical eye to help you develop the muscles you need to make sure that as you start applying AI to your various types of design work, you're not doing things that create horrible problems down the road. And Dan, I think your talk is kind of coming at it from that angle, but it's very structural.
Yeah.
I mean, your talk is, well, first of all, Dan's talk is called Designing for the Infrastructures of Everyday Life. And Dan, I think you're getting into not beyond like physical things. You're getting into places like cities in your talk.
Yeah, I mean, infrastructures is a kind of a, I'm using the word loosely in a way to open up the thought about what infrastructures are and how much we rely on them and how much they capture what we're about as well. You know, they embody the way that places work or societies think they are about, put it that way. So infrastructure really, I mean, the word means, as I understand it anyway, the structures beneath things. Infra, so it means beneath. And so it's immediately start thinking of pipes and subway systems and stuff like that, like literally beneath. But it's the connective tissue between other things that makes places work or doesn't work, I guess. And those things can be physical, like pipes and subways, or they can be digital, like APIs and data centers, I guess, or connecting to data centers. But they're not kind of the thing itself. You know, they're not the football game that you're going to on the subway, and they're equally not the the web page you're looking at that the server farm is serving up. But they're the things that make those things work, and therefore they're also things like, to some extent, hospitals and governance systems, and there's a nice phrase called social infrastructures, which is libraries and museums and galleries and parks and playgrounds and streets and all of those things which make things happen. And I guess I'm positioning AI in that context and saying that really it's maybe a useful way of thinking about it because it underscores how important it is. But it's kind of also not the point, as in it's not the football game, or it's not the book, or it's not the whatever you're doing, but it makes those things work. And as a result, we have to be very careful with it. It's a very powerful thing. If you imagine, I mean, you were just telling me before that the e-bike network you rely on in New York, if that goes down tomorrow morning, you've got a problem, and so do millions of other people. And that will have knock-on effects and spillovers through all of the other transit systems, and then the streets, and so on and so on, right? If the subway goes down, even bigger problem, I imagine, in New York. So those things are fundamentally important, but they're kind of also not the point. And that's a really tricky framing for us usually, because when they're not the point, they're easy to, defund or undercut or not think too carefully about. They don't get maintained. I'm thinking of the New York subway system specifically now.
Yes, yes, but let's not, please.
They just don't get. Well, I know, but that's the point, I guess. That a lot of my work has become over the years more and more to do with the built environment because it so easily captures these things. The way we make a subway station, or indeed a hot dog stand, or whatever, speaks to what we're about as a society and what we value or what we don't. And I think it'll be the same with AI, essentially, that it's going to be a core infrastructure driving things that we absolutely rely on. And as a result, we need to take it seriously and think about it as a public shared infrastructure. And that's tough. We don't have the best track record of that in some countries.
Well, it seems like with all things AI these days, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And I got to think we're already probably experiencing AI applied to the infrastructure.
Sure.
I mean, it's kind of interesting. I hadn't thought of this before, but just a quick aside. I, as a grad student in about 1994, I took a class with John Holland, who I believe was like the first person to get a PhD in computer science in the United States, and was a guy associated with the Santa Fe Institute. And
Right. Yeah.
he had invented in the 50s genetic algorithms, that concept, and had like early on been applied to natural gas pipeline networks.
Yeah.
And that kind of routing is probably an early application of AI and is,
Certainly.
one of the things that is, I mean, when we're using Google Maps to plot our route, that's a piece of, I don't know if you'd call it AI, but it's certainly a highly intelligent digital hunk of infrastructure. So are we going to should we anticipate seeing AI being applied like very rapidly and even successfully to things like figuring out where repair dollars should be invested in the New York subway system as well as its routing?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I'd be very surprised if it wasn't already. I don't know what the MTA use in that sense specifically, but I can't believe that they don't. So one early use case for it would be this kind of predictive maintenance, as in this track's about to need some help, or this train is about to need some repairs, and you can do that based on if you think of just AI's capability for pattern matching and processing tons of data and looking for inferences within that. All of these systems have that capability. Often the issue has been that we don't have that kind of data to hand in the same way that, I don't know, Amazon do about their business. We haven't got sensors installed left, right, and center, or the train may not be sending all of the signals that it could do. But then in other contexts, like airplanes do that all the time. Rolls-Royce engines are constantly beaming data back to Derby in the UK, where they're made, from Airbuses and Boeings in the air about their state at any one time. And that is a ton of data that can then be used to, again, do this kind of predictive maintenance. But in a more mundane level, I wouldn't be surprised if your city bike network is also looking at that, the patterns of use, and then predicting where do we need to put bikes tomorrow morning where are the likely demands and peaks,
Well,
and so that's just, again, these are the more mundane examples and almost basic uses of AI, obviously, but they are just as, Spotify use AI to make Discover Weekly work by crushing all of those playlists together. You can do the same with bike networks. You could do the same with doctors' waiting rooms. You could do the same with airplane systems and so on and so on. So that's what I mean. It's kind of like a general purpose technology, clearly, that lends itself to infrastructural systems pretty easily. And therefore, it's like shifting from gas to electricity or something. It's pretty fundamental. We need to think about, how do we want that to work? On whose terms? How visible is it? How much do people need to know about that? Who owns that stuff? Like, where is the responsibility for maintenance? But also, where's the responsibility then for thinking through more broadly, what's the future of the city and how do we want this place to work?
mhm.
And the briefing I'll say there is, you just think about it, and this, the big tech of the 20th century in this context was the car, right? And a car is a deeply mid 20th century thing. I don't know why they're still around, frankly, but they are, it turns out. But that's what happened then. The car is no more than an infrastructure, really. Not the point, obviously. It gets you somewhere, right? Somewhere you're going is the point. But think about what the car has done, particularly to American cities or Australian cities where I'm sitting and where you're sitting. Those cities have been absolutely transformed by the car. And I would argue for the worst in most cases, with some upsides. But, generally the scorecard is looking pretty bad. So that was a very severe and highly surgical shift. I mean, we're talking, serious shift of the way that cities have worked, with all kinds of winners and losers, mainly losers. So let's not do that again, right?
Well, okay, so that's a good segue to my next question, which is these AI, so we're obviously building AI into lots of complex systems that were already in place. And some of it's pretty primitive still. So you mentioned bike share here in New York. And yes, I biked in yesterday to Lower Manhattan from Brooklyn. And it was a beautiful day. And I guess it had also rained the night before. Long story short, it took me as long to find a dock in Lower Manhattan as it did to bike to Lower Manhattan, which is not how the system is supposed to work. And then I read an article today where Lyft that manages this system said, oh, well, we didn't have enough people to do the rebalancing. So there's like that human element, and you think algorithmically they should be ready for this, but it seems quite primitive still. Now, you take a lot of half-baked implementations like that, I mean, that system's been around for years, and it hasn't really seemed to improve very much. And you start plugging them together, because the city as a piece of infrastructure is really, as you intimate, it's really like hundreds or thousands of separate systems that are each a piece of infrastructure unto themselves.
Yeah.
You plug them together because they will start connecting. We will connect them whether we should or not. And so now my question is, are we getting to a point where AI is going to be used to, will the impact make life better, or will it make things worse? Are we building some sort of horrible Robert Moses-like singularity that is going to just make a city even more dysfunctional than it might feel now? I mean, that's what I'm scared about as a New Yorker.
Yeah, I can't give an answer to that, but I think it's the right question, put it that way. And I think, what I'm saying is we need to learn from the way that we've done that in the past and not do that again. Even to look at Uber and Lyft itself, for instance, ride-sharing companies. As you remember, when they came in, the promise was, well, that'll reduce traffic because we're sharing rides. Everybody doesn't need their own car. It seems perfectly logical, right? That was literally the problem. Well, first wave of Uber obviously was fancy cars outside nightclubs and things, but the second wave was very much this kind of, we'll improve the traffic system through ride sharing, right? And then you look at what happened, and certainly most of the first 10 years have been dominated by headlines like researchers find that it increases traffic congestion by 40% in cities like San Francisco, right, which already had a traffic problem before they came along. And you think, well, why is that happening? And that, that's really not just congestions or hassle, right? Because I mean, it is a hassle and there's economic toll there, but it's literally researchers have shown an increase in carbon emissions, which is then linked to climate change directly. It's created an increase in accidents and deaths. Now, those things are that all the researchers have produced that. And that wasn't the promise, obviously. And what's going on there is that when you look at it from a system point of view, Uber and Lyft and ride-sharing companies like them, I'm just saying for the lawyers listening, are basically incentivizing drivers to get on the road. So why does it work if you pull out your phone in Manhattan now, there'll be an Uber driver, I imagine 2 minutes away maximum, right? So how is that possible? It's because the system is incentivizing drivers to be ready just in case you pull your phone out of your pocket, and the same for another 7 million people or something, right? So that does not work when you scale that up to a city. That works from an interaction design kind of point of view, if you see what I mean, as in at the pointy end of imagine like a funnel with kind of ambit or spheres of influence from a design point of view. The interaction designer's job is to make it work on your phone in that moment there. The service designer, maybe their job is to think about the wider set of touch points that connects to, maybe a bit of the organizational stuff and so on. That really is excellent work by the designers at the ride-sharing companies. I mean, those apps work, right? And they're technically very good, I would say, as a former interaction designer. The issue is when you scale that up to the city end of the diagram, if you keep widening your scope and you start getting into the ambit of, let's say, urban planners and architects and urban designers or transport planners who have to make a city work, it's useless, it's terrible. So what works at the individual end of things does not work at the city end of things, because a city is more than just a group of individuals that happen to be in the same place at the same time. I've seen the impact of tech move from things like, can I buy a book, to or what's on TV tonight, or who's the capital of who's the president of Venezuela. Like that does not have a societal impact necessarily. Maybe the book bit does. We could come back to that. But once you start moving that into urban systems, environments, we have to be aware that those scales are all connected, and that the decisions you take from an individual point of view, of course, matter in the city or the environment. And I know this is the biggest challenge we have as a species. We're not very good at that, but that is precisely what we need to be looking at with AI now, because unless we've got a meaningful conversation happening between those disciplines at all those different scales, we will take that Uber Lyft problem and multiply it 1,000-fold. And that will mean the same impacts we have with traffic congestion and carbon and death also happening to hospital systems, to the way we make buildings work, to elevators, to food systems, to or basically the things we rely on. So we don't want to do that.
I mentioned Robert Moses, who's like the evil force behind New York of the last 100 years, and he must be just smiling in his grave right now, thinking about all the things we're about to unleash on ourselves. You used a word a moment ago that we need that I really like. We need a lens, and so let's get back to that. We're going to take a quick break. Everyone, you're listening to the Rosenfeld Review. We're talking with Dan Hill, and we'll be right back. Hey, it's Lou. I got a interesting announcement for you. I think you'll be happy to hear this, because you're probably someone who has to prioritize things. Well, our next book, Managing Priorities, How to Create Better Plans and Make Smarter Decisions. Long-awaited book by Harry Max. It is now available for pre-order from Rosenfeld Media at 15% off. The book comes out for real on May 14th, 2024. So that's coming up fast. It is, as far as I can tell, the only book out there that's all about managing priorities. That's it. And it's good if you're an individual with priorities. I know you are. Also, if you have a team that needs prioritization, or even an organization. So pick up a copy of Harry Max's Managing Priorities today, now available for pre-order at 15% off from rosenfeldmedia.com. Welcome back to the Rosenfeld Review. I'm talking with Dan Hill, educator, author and the opening speaker at Designing with AI, June 4th and 5th, virtual conference that we're putting on. Dan, right before the break, you were talking about a lens to help us see through a lot of the complexity of these many systems that make up the infrastructure of design of big complex places like cities.
Hmm.
Can is that concept of a lens coming together in a way that people can, at least in the design community, can grasp?
Yes, maybe. I think lens is a useful way of framing it, but maybe you and I both wear spectacles, glasses, so we'll be aware of this. You know, when you go to the optometrist and they shuffle those different lenses over your eyes to figure out which, basically how thick they need to make the glass, and in my case, very thick. So they kind of quickly like riffle through them. It's a bit like that, or looking through the microscope and then the telescope. Those kinds of things is what coming to mind when I'm thinking of this lens question. And it just the way that we've organized businesses, particularly in the tech world, enables them to sidestep those wider responsibilities. And again, maybe that was less of an issue in the early days, but now that that's moving into again these core infrastructures of everyday life, that's not good enough. We need to think through carefully the impacts up and down the scale here. So yes, the microscope, but also the telescope. And that means, yes, the interaction design needs to be really, really good. Otherwise, no one's going to use it. But if you're making a system, you need to be then thinking through if you're dropping it into the city or in the environment in some way, as in the material world of some kind. And by the way, I really like this quote by Ursula K. Le Guin, the writer. Her definition of technology, if I can get this right, technology is the active human interface with the material world. So it's a really lovely quote because it basically says they are the tools that we use then basically to interact with the material world around us. And it's in her essay, a short rant about technology, she called it. She talks about, matches and matchsticks, and those are technologies. And imagine trying to light a fire without those things.
Mm-hmm.
We know how hard that is, and therefore the power of this stuff. But that's all it's doing. It's just making a fire happen where previously wasn't a fire out of the material world, using a bit of the material world. So the same, I would argue, with the ride-sharing companies. It's the way that you're moving through space and physical and built environments, right? And it's a real car that turns up, made of real material. It's kind of clearly it couldn't really work without the internet in that way. But essentially, it's a taxi, just like Airbnb is essentially a sort of a hotel. It's just that it's massively distributed because of the way that the internet enables you to shuffle the deck of how we organize stuff and redistribute things. But it's still you interacting with the material world. And so that has a real effect on things, real systems. It's no longer, again, just sort of when you and I were in the late 90s or mid 90s and we could sort of make our website very quickly without having much impact on that kind of world. Now it's something else. And that's why these lenses are useful. And it's definitely making it work at these ideas of these different scales, the app in your phone or your pocket, the environment that you're using that in, but then thinking through, so what do those systems do then on the building, the street, the neighborhood, the city, or in a different context, the classroom, the way the school is run, the education system, or water, where does that come from? How's that going to get there? Where's it coming from? All of those things. AI is already all over them. And we haven't really had a good way of, we don't have the best track record of handling that. And maybe one last quote and I'll shut up. But then this another British, well, maybe two, a Finnish architect, Eliel Saarinen, said a long time ago, maybe 120 years ago, always design a chair in the context of a room, and a room in the context of a house, and the house in the context of the street in the neighborhood, and so on. So this idea of these different scales is clearly connected up. And it's really hard because when you're designing a chair, you're thinking, what? I have to think about the whole city? But what it's going to, in a sense, you don't. But obviously, where's that material coming from? That is coming from somewhere else outside of the room that you're in. And so that is a good question to ask, actually. But it certainly also helps you design the room and the chair. And then if you're designing the room, you clearly need to think about a house and then the street and so on. So all of those things are connected. And I think that's the So again, that's like 130 years old of this quote. He's not really thinking of AI clearly, but that is a long. We've got a long history of thinking about that with cities, and have made that work well in some cities for sure. There are places like Tokyo, maybe Helsinki, where that guy was from. Those are examples of cities where they have managed to think through those different scales and relationships in more harmonious ways. Put it that way than, for instance, Manhattan or Melbourne, where we're sitting.
So, you're, and of course, like Saarinen, I imagine influenced the Ames when they did the Power of 10 film, Powers of 10.
Yeah, very much. It's that kind of thinking.
Yeah. What I hear in what you're saying is there's a need. There's actually many lenses, and you need to figure out which one to apply in the right moment. But there's still, the lens you use on the room is not exactly the same as the lens you use on the house or on the chair. But those lenses are connected. They're part of a set, if you will.
Yeah.
And it makes me wonder if the people in places like Helsinki that are more successful, what are those? Where are they getting their sets of lenses? And are they a wide enough group of people that they can actually work together from the same set of lenses? Like, I'm almost envisioning how a hospital might be set up with different medical specialties that are all focused on, they all have their lenses to look at different systems, but if they're going to be successful, you better be looking at how the cardiovascular system hooks into the neurological system, et cetera, et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
Are there models like that are helping them work from the same kit of lenses?
Well, I think this is where we started getting into this idea of strategic design about 10, 15 years ago. I say we, like a whole bunch of people, some of whom I know and some of whom I don't, but certainly the people I was working with at the time in Helsinki, actually, was where I was thinking. Brian Boyer, Marcus Steinberg, Justin Cook at Helsinki Design Lab at Citra. What we're not saying is that you need some master designer who is in charge of all the lenses. That would be, to your early point about Robert Moses, that's the problem of that. You end up kind of making slightly brutish big moves with very complex systems, which really are millions of individuals. And so with all of their diversity and foibles and complexities, right? So Moses gets a bad rap, but he deserves it.
Yes.
In most of the cases, but then he did do some good things as well. And James Jacobs was also not so good at the big stuff, I would say, but incredibly good at the neighborhood and district scale. So all of these characters work at different levels. That what we thought strategic design might usefully do was basically run around connecting them all up and saying, you guys need to talk to each other. Just that in itself would be a step forward, right? So it would be a recognition that this is a system and a system of systems, and these things are connected through things left, right, and center. And therefore, what we need to think about is how do we enable better conversations between these different scales, recognizing that we're all wearing those different lenses. So there is no one lens that we can apply to the whole system.
Right.
And equally, the corollary is if we just then have no connection whatsoever, then we end up with, the city just being an assemblage of a million individual choices, which does not work. It's that is absolute chaos, actually, and it doesn't work. So there are things you can put in place there. Culture is one thing for sure that makes things work in, say, Finland and Japan, in a way that it's just harder in the UK or the US, say, because our cultures in the UK and the US are far more heterogeneous and diverse. Whereas in Finland and Japan, just reasons of history, this is not any value judgment us either way, right? They just can take shortcuts on some things to do with understanding how people might react to a particular question. So if you look at the Finnish education system, say, which is one of the best in the world, repeatedly amongst the best, the way that they make that work is they have a set of incredibly beautiful founding principles written down around the rights of the child, the rights of the child to play, all kinds of things. I mean, it just, almost makes you cry. They're just so beautiful. And they're written at this almost national level. There's no curriculum. There's no standardized testing. There's no extra homework. They spend less time in school than almost any other country. And so there's none of the kind of nonsense that we've had in the UK and the US about, continual assessment and as if it's a machine. The way that they make that work is them training their teachers really well, paying them well, respecting them in society. Okay. So if you get to that point where a teacher is not beleaguered and overworked and constantly testing themselves and being tested within a system where data shows that makes no difference whatsoever to performance, and instead you give them the time to work, and you teachers teach less, so they have more time to think about their teaching, and they can tune their curriculum at the school level, essentially, outside of a broad set of understandings, then that works because of the cultural glue as well as a set of systems. And it's a beautiful model that I think we could learn a lot from. And then a big question is, how would you apply that into places that are fragmented, either problematically or in a beautiful way because they're very diverse?
Right. And, going back to the example of the hospital and the issues of language. In the hospital, they're all working from scientific names from Latin. They really literally have a consistent language. That is not the same for the people who operate the various lenses and certainly the various systems that make up the infrastructure of a thing like a city. Yeah. Dan, oh my goodness, we could go on. It's going to be fantastic to hear your talk at Designing with AI on June 4th. Really looking forward to seeing how you explore this concept of lenses, and Lord knows we need it. Before we wrap in Rosenfeld review tradition, I'd love to know if you brought our listeners a gift.
Yeah, so I just read a great book by the Indian writer Amitav Ghosh called Smoke and Ashes. And in a way, it gets, I think, a little bit of what I've been talking about, the unforeseen circumstances and sometimes deliberate intent behind the way we put systems together, I guess. The book isn't really directly about that, just more bluntly, it's about the opium trade and its relationship to the British Empire in particular, and then most of American early wealth, I guess, as in recent American, I would say, colonized America. And it ends in the opioid crisis, but it starts about 700 years before that. So it's an extraordinary sweep through history and describes these systems at work there, often for really super problematic outcomes, obviously, for most people involved, which is also interesting. Like, how do these systems move with intent and then without intent? And then the last thing I would say, that the why I think it may be relevant is because Ghosh, the writer, kind of positions the opium poppy as an actor in the book as well, as if it's an intelligence that's kind of exploiting humanity's own characteristics to propagate itself. And so this idea of an other intelligence at work and figuring out how we need to work with that, that's really what I want to get at in the talk as well. How do we work alongside these other intelligences that we can't speak to directly, but in some way they're shifting systems as well on their own terms?
It's going to be fantastic. And that is now going to be on my list of books to read or sit on my nightstand with, certainly with your book.
You should put it on top of my book. He's a proper writer.
I just hope some of our books are on your nightstand, but
they are in my Kindle version of my nightstand.
There you go. Dan Hill, director of the Melbourne School of Design at the University of Melbourne, and author of Dark Matter and Trojan Horses, a strategic design vocabulary. Dan, it's been wonderful talking with you, and we're looking forward to hearing you on June 4th. Thanks again.
Thanks, Lou.
Hey, it's Lou. Thank you for listening to the latest Rosenfeld Review podcast. I really appreciate it. I would love to hear from you. And if you want to pop me an email, lou@rosenfeldmedia.com. Tell me what you thought. Better yet, leave me the hell alone and post a review on your favorite podcast platform. Please feed the algorithm. It really does make a difference. We want to get the word out. If you like the word, give us a hand. And while I'm asking you for favors, don't forget, buy books. Support your favorite local independent publisher. We happen to be one, rosenfeldmedia.com. All those great UX books are there. So, Thanks again.